Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Yates. I'm from the Traffic Intelligence and Planning section of the South Australia Police, and I'm one of your hosts for this session. We are delighted that you can join us at this webinar hosted by the Road Policing Network. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands across Australia on which we are all joining from today. For those of us here in South Australia, we pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the Adelaide Plains. We honour their enduring connection to the land, waters and culture, and acknowledge that this connection remains strong today. I also extend my respects to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today from all other communities. We are very excited about both our presenters today and the fascinating topic that they'll be exploring. Since 2019, UK police agencies have increasingly adopted dashcam enforcement programs, leveraging the ubiquity of video technology to address dangerous driving offences reported by the public. But how effective are these programs, and what role does public engagement play in their success? To help us unpack these questions, we're joined by Acting Inspector Christopher Hayes from Victoria Police and Leading Senior Constable Andrew McKellar from the Australian Federal Police. Chris will share insights from his recent Winston Churchill Fellowship, which explored alternative enforcement methods, while Andrew will discuss the implementation of automated dashcam enforcement in the ACT. We've allowed at least 20 minutes for a Q&A session at the end of the presentations, so we kindly ask that you enter any questions onto the Q&A button below, and we'll address them at the end. Thank you very much, and with that, I'll now hand over to Chris.
Chris, you're still muted.
Could you unmute me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Casey. I'll just push on, assuming that everyone can hear me. Andrew and I are both very excited to present. We understand there's great interest from the membership to tune in today, so thank you for giving your time. I should firstly acknowledge that while I'm dressed as a police officer from Victoria, I am actually presenting today my own opinions and findings as a Churchill Fellowship recipient. Andrew will be presenting, of course, from the AFP's point of view, but I thought I'd just make that distinction clear. And also acknowledge that Victoria Police has been very supportive of the fellowship journey, and that senior police leadership, including Assistant Commissioner Glenn Weir, have been key behind that. The purpose of today is to really key the membership into the idea of this emerging opportunity. The idea that police could enforce from a video supplied by a member of the public is really interesting. I personally think it's underutilised. And so we'll take you through my journey across the world to where I found this, and then how it came to be in Australia and how it's actually being deployed in Canberra. Just a quick trigger warning. I know these are relatively ineffective, but if there's someone who's tuned in, we are dealing with at least one slide that deals with concepts of death. And so if today's not the day for you, please tune out and ask for a copy of the recording when it's available. I also like to acknowledge and echo the words provided by Casey at the start. The traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia. We're coming to you from Melbourne on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung. And now we begin the presentation proper. So where this all began, for me at least, started on the 22nd of April 2020. And as you can see from the slide, that was a particularly tragic day for Victoria Police and policing across Australia. At the time of this incident, I was a crash investigator with the Major Collision Investigation Unit and was one of the response team who were called out in the 24 hours around the time of this incident. As you can see on screen, we have 4 police members who lost their lives in this single tragedy: Glenn Humphreys, Kevin King, Lynette Taylor, and Josh Presney. Glenn had graduated from the police academy only 1 month prior to this crash, and so had only experienced the first slice of policing. The incident occurred when a drug-affected, fatigued truck driver on the Eastern Freeway in Kew, one of our main arterial roads, veered into the emergency lane of a 4-lane freeway and collided with 2 stationary police cars and the 4 police members who were on foot at that location. Those police members were doing something we do many times every day, a routine police activity where they'd intercepted someone and they were waiting for a tow truck to come and hook up the car and take it away under impound. I just want to highlight that is that this risk that police expose themselves to every day is rare. How often does a truck crash into a police car? But the outcome is catastrophic. So the incident at Kew really highlights what I call the paradox of enforcement. The fact that we would allow ourselves to expose ourselves to road trauma in the name of road safety is paradoxical in itself. And when you look a bit deeper into the statistics, since 1990, 15 police officers across Australia have died while performing proactive road policing duties. If you want to expand that out, that's one member every 2 years, which doesn't sound like much, but that's one member too many. And so not only is this a senseless loss of life, it doesn't accord with the vision of zero that we've adopted across Australia. So we can't walk away from this practice. If we turned off road policing tomorrow, there would be pretty disastrous outcomes for the motoring public. So what we do is we try to mitigate it. And we know, if you look at the hierarchy of controls, we know the bottom red triangle very well. We know about fluorescent vests and flashing lights and vehicle positioning techniques. Then moving up the hierarchy, we know about the administrative controls that govern the way people work. The engineering controls, of course, the road design, trying to isolate people from the actual hazard itself. But I think in policing, where we're so proficient at managing risk, especially high risk, we may become a little tolerant to it and neglect to explore those top slices of the hierarchy of substitution and elimination. So this is something that sat with me for a few years. I didn't quite know how to sort of deal with this idea of this paradoxical enforcement, but it helps to return to the original idea of what enforcement is seeking to achieve. Why are we exposing ourselves to this risk in the first place? Well, at the very high level, at the philosophical level, the principles that have guided British and Australian policing, of course, those Peelian principles from Sir Robert Peel. And foremost among those, I think, are the notion that police are the public and the public are the police. The uniform I'm wearing today is only because of my role. And similarly, a person dressed in civilian clothes out in the street, they also have a responsibility, a civic duty to cooperate and act in the interest of the community. The second principle I wanted to bring up is that prevention is better than response, and that speaks for itself. We know full well the cost, both human and financial, of road trauma and how that compares to that much smaller cost that we expend in trying to prevent it. So back to basics, and I'm sorry for people who are well across this, but enforcement has three key pillars: certainty, severity, and celerity. The first one, certainty, is this notion that offending is likely to result in being caught. That is, you're driving along the streets and you have this innate understanding that if you breach the rules, you're likely to be detected. The second one is severity. So if you are detected, that punishment must sting just enough to be an appreciable consequence. If you were pulled over for travelling at 45 kilometres over the speed limit and were fined $2, that wouldn't satisfy that principle. The third one of celerity, well, I had to look this word up when I first heard about it, but essentially it's the swiftness with which the sanction follows the offending behaviour. There's a reason that we don't prosecute minor matters beyond the statutory period of limitations. So this enforcement framework, these principles, are all designed to achieve deterrence. And that's where I wanted to just cue you into two of the specific types of deterrence. One is specific deterrence, and that really is that individual apprehension of experience and the consequences. So, people who've actually been detected and suffered fines, loss of license, loss of employment, imprisonment, or even those social punishments of having injured someone or taken a life. The second one is general deterrence. And this is one that I can speak about this from Victoria Police point of view. This is something we're really trying to leverage because specific deterrence requires individual interactions. But general deterrence is what it says on the label. It's a much broader effect. And those are the potential offenders driving past or who know of the enforcement framework who are deterred by the notion that they could be detected and punished. So this is a really powerful tool that we're trying to use to great effect in Victoria. High visibility policing is exactly what we're talking about. But of course, we still require police in uniforms, in cars, to deliver that intervention. So like I said, I spent a couple of years sitting with this idea, and ultimately someone encouraged me to answer this effectively unanswerable question through a Churchill Fellowship application. Now, at this point, I should probably plug exactly what the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust does. And so for your benefit, it's a trust that was established in 1965, immediately after the death of Sir Winston Churchill, who had himself told the Duke of Edinburgh prior to his death that he'd like a living memorial, something that provided the opportunity for ordinary people to travel and meet people and learn from those experiences. So the aim of the trust is to do exactly that, to afford Australians the opportunity to travel overseas to conduct research in their chosen field. By way of background, it's funded through that initial seed money, which was a prolific door knock conducted by the RSL and remains one of the greatest one-day door knock efforts in Australian history. Combined with Australian government contributions and that of philanthropists, they raised $4.4 million, which continues to provide over 100 fellowships each year. So to cut a long story short, I was successful in my application to investigate, to improve road safety by assessing alternatives to enforcement on high-speed roads. Boil that down, I wanted to know how else could we deliver this enforcement effort at the roadside without suffering the risk of having a drug-affected truck driver crash into us while we're doing so. The award is actually named for the NRMA ACT Road Safety Trust. I acknowledge their contribution as well. Let's go back one slide. You can see the journey actually took me across North America to the UK, Sweden and Germany. But what I'd really like to focus on is my experience in South Wales, where I met with the South Wales Police in Cardiff with an open mind. And they took me out on the road, as you can see in the picture, and we saw how they interacted with the public and what sort of enforcement attitudes they had. But it was when I went back to the police station that I was introduced to a very small team who operated something called Operation Snap. Now, Operation Snap is a collaboration across all 4 of the Welsh policing agencies facilitated by their road safety agency, Go Safe Wales. But the notion of what Operation Snap does is actually reflected more broadly across the UK. Operation Snap is exactly what I've expressed to you at the start of this presentation. It's public submissions of dashcam that go to the police for investigation. But what makes it different from something like a Crime Stoppers operation is that those reports go to a centralised team who can provide a consistent outcome and an almost automated enforcement outcome that doesn't require a police officer to then go out and conduct an investigation. It's effectively a blend between on-the-road policing, Crime Stoppers, and perhaps a automated traffic camera operation. It's quite prolific now. It's across 41 of the 43 UK policing jurisdictions. They're coordinated, and I use that term loosely, by the National Road Crime Reporting Group. And I say coordination loosely because not all of the processes are the same, nor is the enthusiasm for this OpSnap dashcam enforcement. Some police agencies, for example, yes, they have the capability for you to submit, for a member of the public to submit a dashcam video, but the link is buried somewhere at the back of their homepage and very hard to find and not promoted. Other agencies are on the front foot. They recognise the value of this sort of a program. They spruik it on social media. They communicate back with the submitters and drive the bulk of the effort. That effort, at last check, looked about 6,000 submissions across the UK agencies per month. The submissions come from these cameras. Now, I've said dash cam because it's such a popular term, but we really are talking about any camera. You can see Ring doorbell cameras. We know that they've solved crimes already, serious crimes. Cyclists and motorcyclists are now almost all equipped with cameras to protect themselves. Other cars, other drivers seem to equip their cars with cameras to be able to impartially say who was at fault in a collision. In the top right, you can see an emergency services worker with a camera. And I think this is something really interesting when we talk about roadside worker safety, is that if we start to use these relatively cheap technologies to protect our people, then how does enforcement then flow from detected instances of near miss or members being struck at the roadside? And I think there's an opportunity here for police agencies to use this platform to protect themselves as well. Now, before I left Wales, I thanked the team, handed over a challenge coin, and they said, "Oh, do you know Andrew from the AFP?" I said, "No, I work for Victoria Police. We're kind of different." And they explained to me that the AFP had beat me to it. They had actually been there a few months prior with the same question in mind. So you can already see that the UK jurisdiction, with the way they've rolled this out, has really attracted international attention already from Australia. Now, the impetus behind this adoption by the UK agencies sort of all started in 2017 when it was relatively organic in the way it evolved. As camera technology improved, files became smaller and more high definition. People started to submit them to police, regardless. USB stick, CDs, they'd go to the watch house counter and hand them over, asking police to investigate. This came out in an all-parliamentary group report who recommended, and I'll read from the slide here, that all police forces should ensure that evidence of common offences submitted by cyclists and other witnesses using bike or person-mounted cameras or smartphones is put to use and not ignored. So this is the piece where people were handing this stuff over the counter and nothing was happening. And I'm not suggesting any jurisdiction in Australia would do this, but I do wonder how well we service the submissions that we already receive through our partner agencies like Crime Stoppers. Then 3 years later, an official report was published by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire Rescue Services. That also made a recommendation, and it had quite a provocative title, the report, that roads policing was not optional. So recommendation 9, you can see the top part of the screen, with immediate effect. Enforces where Operation SNAP has been adopted, Chief Constable should make sure that it has enough resources and process to support its efficient and effective use. And that was something that was echoed to me by the Welsh Police, was that you do need to be able to service all the submissions and expect to receive an incremental flow of submissions. So if you start with one person checking an inbox at the start of your program, you must expect to be able to expand that program, or they'll get swamped and your program will suffer. Also a good time to acknowledge the research of Dr. Helen Wells and Dr. Santiago Amieta from Keele University. Dr. Wells actually gave a plenary talk on this subject at the Road Safety Conference in Hobart last year. So some of you may have already been exposed to her findings, but essentially Dr. Wells at Keele University received a large grant from the Road Safety Trust to conduct 18 months of research on how these existing journey cam technologies could be most effectively used by police, with the outcome in mind of reducing road offending and improving road safety. I'm not going to present Dr. Wells's work, but I encourage you to go to the link, look it up. It's on the Road Safety Trust's website, publicly available. But what I will point out is that this was a mixed method approach where they looked at data analysis, surveys, interviews, and horizon scanning to understand how it could be used most effectively. I want to highlight 3 key things here. The first theme is the importance of consistency. I talked about coordination before. That's one part of consistency. especially in the UK, where you can travel across 2 or 3 policing jurisdictions in a day. But consistency of the decision making as well. So a team that understands how to enforce these different offences that we see on the road. So some expertise is required. And I've seen some agencies who use almost like a 2-factor checking, where someone will check, confirm that an offence has occurred, and then the supervisor will actually approve that that offence proceed to prosecution. Thank you. Submissions by vulnerable road users. Here's a real opportunity to place a protective bubble around these people who are at greatest risk on the road. Cyclists, motorcyclists, people who often wonder where the police are when something happens to them. Well, they now have an opportunity to be part of the enforcement process. And I've covered that already, the third theme of the decision-making reliability and the, I suppose, credibility of the program has to be preserved, just like a road safety camera program. So I've got a little video here. I apologise for the jerkiness that's streaming through to you, but you should be able to get a sense of the type of offences that are eligible for prosecution. The video you're watching is from the ACT, and that's why I'd like to introduce Leading Senior Constable Andrew McKellar to the next part of the presentation. Andrew was the person mentioned to me by South Wales Police. He's the person who's done the most work in the ACT to bring their program to life. And once this video concludes, you'll hear from Andrew. And I'd just like to close my part of the presentation by pointing out that police can't be everywhere all the time, but the road using public are, and they care. So as personal cameras become cheaper and higher quality, more widely used, I think police agencies need to be ready to receive, just as they did when people were handing this stuff over the counter. The police agencies need to be ready to receive this information and act upon it. I know, at least from our jurisdictional experience, that strains on resources, I think, mean that law enforcement agencies are starting to discover a bit of a ceiling when it comes to road policing and how we can contribute. This might represent the next shift in the way we deliver enforcement. Over to you, Andrew.
All right, thank you for that, Chris. So I'm going to talk to you about the ACT's implementation of Operation SNAP or OpSNAP, right from the very start of the initial concept all the way through to implementation, and then some statistics around how it's been going since it's been launched. We're calling it Dangerous Driving Online Reporting in the ACT. I'm just going to refer to it as OpSNAP throughout the presentation, as that's much easier. Okay, so first up, we'll talk about the history, how it all came about. So in May 2021, I was looking at some UK dashcam videos. I like looking at that sort of stuff. And I just happened to stumble across one that was put out by a UK police force showing a submission, dashcam submission to police that had been prosecuted, and the outcome of that. And I looked at it and I went, wow, what's this? This is amazing. I'd love to show you a video now, but just due to time constraints, I won't. But I thought, wow, this is great. Let's look into this and see what can be done. So I started firing off emails to a number of UK police forces asking, who do I need to speak to about OpSNAP? A couple of weeks later, I got a response from a lovely lady called Teresa at Go Safe Wales, which, as Chris mentioned, is the road safety body there. And she was the person that initially implemented OpSNAP over there. So I had some long conversations with her about it, how it worked. She was very, very excited that someone from Australia was potentially looking at implementing OpSNAP in Australia. And everything that she said about it was very positive. It was going really well over there, and it was very well received by the public and that sort of thing. She also put me on to Egress Software. They were the company that wrote the software allowed the members of the public to submit their footage to the police, and also the back end part where the police could log in to view the videos and download them and that sort of thing. I initially got a figure from Egress that for about $25,000 Australian, they could set up OpSNAP for us, which is the front end form and the back end. And I thought that was really quite good for a relatively low $25,000. So what happened in October of that year, October 21, I put in a grant to the ACT Road Safety Fund for that $25,000, so that we could implement OpSNAP in Canberra. So fast forward to January 22, and I was informed that my application had been successful. We'd been given that money, or granted that money, so that we could purchase that software. So that obviously kicked off a flurry of excitement and things that working out how we're going to do things. So I managed to convince my hierarchy, including the chief police officer, that I needed to go to the UK for 2 weeks to fully investigate OpSnap. And the main reason was we were to look at the back-end policies, procedures to see how it was run, because by this stage the UK had been running for about three years or so, and we wanted to piggyback off how they were doing it and not reinvent the wheel. So myself and at the time the officer in charge of road policing, we went over the last week of April, first week of May 22, and we visited 5 police forces. We spent 2 days with South Wales Police, 3 days with Dyford Powys, and 1 day each with Central Motorways, Thames Valley, and the Metropolitan Police. And I've got to say, all those police forces were extremely enthusiastic about OpSnap. I didn't hear a bad word about it. They were, it was all positive. We also spent a bit of time with Egress Software in London, speaking to them about how the implementation would go ahead and that. So we came back and were very excited about OpSnap. So pretty much upon my return, I organised for the purchase of the software, and within a few weeks, Egress had set it up for us. Obviously, it wasn't live, but it had been set up for testing purposes and that. And here I was thinking that, okay, June 22, we're going to be going live with OpSnap in the ACT. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I was very naive. So this kicked off an approvals process, which dragged on for about 10 months. So in March of 23, 10 months later, our operational science and technology group got back to me and said essentially that they weren't going to support OpSnap in its current format. And the main reasons for that, they told me, were because Egress Software was an overseas-based company. The hosting was based overseas, so they were concerned about privacy and data and that being held in overseas storage locations. So essentially, it wasn't supported. So at this time, I almost threw in the towel at this time, because it seemed like no one wanted to support me, and there was no way forward of being able to do this. But fortunately, at this time, or around this time, ACT Police had also been investigating generating their own online reporting tool for non-critical time and low risk matters, such as graffiti, property damage, that sort of thing. And that actually launched on the 7th of July 23, which I think the first form that they put live was for property damage. So what we did, and the timing was fortuitous, that we decided to integrate OpSnap into the online reporting. And what we're going to do is just essentially copy the form that they used in the UK that Egress had previously done, but into our own online reporting tool. So we did that in September 23. We'd actually generated the OpSnap form, and we'd been testing it, and it was all good to go. Not live at this stage. We're going through some more approvals processes, etc. We're intending to go live several times in late 23, but the date kept on getting pushed back for various reasons, because every time something would come up, we'll go, okay, there's something else I need approval for. And that culminated in January of 24 with cybersecurity. Had to do an assessment. And I got told at that time by cyber that it wasn't a priority, because they were short-staffed. They had a lot of other priorities and work ahead. And they told me it was going to take at least 6 months before they'd even begin to start looking at OpSnap. So I escalated that up the chain, because obviously that wasn't good. And fortunately, the hierarchy at ACT Policing was, at this point, really wanted to see OpSnap go live. So one of the commanders and the chief police officer basically told cybersecurity, no, you need to make this a priority. So within 2 weeks, they'd employed a contractor, paid them a big sum of money, well, for 2 weeks' work anyway, and that risk assessment was done. So thanks for the CPO and the commander for stepping in there to help out in that regard. So in April 24, we did a soft launch for testing. So when I say a soft launch, I mean we didn't advertise it. There was no link on our website or anything like that. But if someone rang up our comm centre 131 and said, I've got dash cam of an incident, the operator would ask them if they wanted to trial a new method of submitting their evidence, and they would send them out the link by email so that they could do that. And we did have a few submissions there, and we were able to test the procedures and that and see that it was all working well. So come the 8th of May, we launched live. And that was exactly almost 3 years after I first started looking at OpSnap, and 2 years exactly to the day when I returned from the UK. It was two very long and frustrating years, I can tell you. So that then became a resourcing issue about how we were going to run OpSnap. Because initially I was running OpSnap by myself, as well as doing my current day-to-day job as well. And that sort of come to a head in August, September, because the submissions were starting to increase, and I'll show you the stats later. And basically, I had to hand it over to an online reporting team to run it, because I simply couldn't continue to do it by myself and do my job as well. It needed to be resourced appropriately. And I think it's important to note there too that at this time, even though we'd gone live in July with our online reporting, we didn't have an online reporting team. So who was doing the submissions? So that's the question. And what was happening was the people in the comm centre, in between taking phone calls, they were having to triage online reporting reports as well. So that was a bit of a flaw in our setup. We should have had the online reporting team set up before all this commenced, but we didn't. So in September 24, they started filling spots to generate an online reporting team to handle all these online submissions we were getting, not only from OpSnap, but other things as well, such as petrol drive-offs, graffiti. Now we've expanded into other things such as historical sexual assaults, and there'll be more coming in the future too. So the challenges, as I've alluded to previously, so internal policies, procedures and approvals, a lot of red tape, and that's probably going to be the same for a lot of police jurisdictions. Obviously convincing the hierarchy of the value of OpSnap. Now, I was very fortunate that my road policing hierarchy was extremely supportive of it and allowed me to explore it. Further up the chain, look, I'd never spoke to any of the hierarchy about it myself, but the way they supported me when it came to talking to cyber, and they wanted it live too. So I think that the hierarchy did, and otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get one of these things off the line. So staffing and resourcing, as I just mentioned, is extremely important. It needs to be timely and appropriate, and all these things should be in place before launch, not trying to work out afterwards how we're going to resource it. Because in the UK, from all the places we visited, they have dedicated OpSnap teams of between 2 and 6 people running it, and that's all they do, nothing but OpSnap. Public awareness, we did that via, when we first launched, we did TV stand-ups, radio, as well as public available Facebook and Twitter, as well as media releases, that sort of thing, to get people to know about OpSnap. There's also the public perception. We're fortunate that most people seem to be very supportive of OpSnap. However, like anything that involves the police, you can have that small vocal minority who are against it, talking about privacy, why are we doing the police's job for them, we're a surveillance state now, all this type of thing. But thankfully they seem to be in the minority. Now, because we're operating off dash cam evidence submitted to police here, obviously the driver isn't being pulled over and we're not identifying the driver. So we need to be sending out infringements to the registered operator of the vehicle. And that's generally how speed cameras work. But in the UK, for example, they must send out a notice of intended prosecution within 14 days of the offence to the registered keeper, as they call it over there. And then the registered keeper must write in and tell them who was driving at the time before they can send out an infringement. So that adds a lot of extra paperwork for the UK. Fortunately, in the ACT, we can send out an infringement direct to the registered operator within 12 months of the offence. And I think Chris can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe in Victoria that you're not able to do that. And that would require a legislative change, and that may be the case in other jurisdictions in Australia as well. So infringements to companies, based on that same principle, what we found is that somewhere around 5 to 10% of the submissions are company vehicles. And again, we don't want to be contacting companies to find out who was driving at the time, and that would add a lot of extra workload. So what we do is we send out the infringements to the companies the same as a speed camera would. But interestingly, in the ACT, our infringement system on our phones, the app that we use, never had the ability to send infringements to companies, only to individuals. And I can only surmise that's because 99% or 99.9% of the time, a police officer stops a vehicle, identify the driver, so the infringement gets sent to that actual driver. But in this case, we've got a company, so hence why it's probably never been done in the past. So I had to organise for our software to be modified to allow issuance to a company, which cut out a lot of the back end red tape there. So efficiencies, saves a lot of time, the OpSnap method of doing it. We've estimated between 60 to 80% time saved per submission. Now, if you think about the old-fashioned way of doing something like this, someone will ring up comms 131444 and say, I've got a traffic complaint, I've got dash cam. The operator will put on a job, it'll get dispatched to a patrol. A patrol would have to ring up the complainant, organise a time to go to their home or workplace to pick up the footage. They'll then have to drive there. They'll speak to the complainant, grab the footage, drive back to the station, view the footage, then ring the complainant again to have a chat about it, probably, and then decide on a course of action. So as you can imagine, that's extremely time consuming. And not only is it time consuming, but it's taking a patrol off the road rather than leaving them to focus on their core duties of being out there on the road and being visible and proactive. As Chris mentioned, it also allows a consistent approach and response to submissions by having that one centralised team who are running it, rather than different individuals with wildly varying attitudes as to what action they may or may not take by the submitted dash cam. The response time, what we've allowed for, what we say on the website is we'll respond initially within 1 to 2 business days. Quite often, the person, when they submit their report, they'll get responded to. It potentially could even be within minutes or hours, depending on how many, what backlog they've got at the time. So there's generally quite a fast response. One of the big bonuses is we've got a centralised data and intelligence collection system, because you've got all of it being submitted to OpSnap, whereas previously there's no real way of reporting on all these submissions, at least in the ACT. And in the public perception, there's always been in the past, oh, police don't do anything with the submitted dash cam when I've sent it to them. Well, yeah, they do. Now we've got OpSnap. We take the reports of dangerous driving seriously, and we do action them, and I'll show you the stats later. So we've got increased reporting, I think, both due to the convenience and also the fact that the public now see that we are taking action on these reports. So how does it actually all work? So obviously the member of the public first has to record a driving incident. They submit the details online. We've got a form on our website. I'd love to show it to you now, but again, due to time constraints, I won't. There's 3 important considerations built into the form. They must have digital evidence, and they tick a box to say that they do. They also tick a box to say that must be prepared to attend court in case the matter gets disputed by the driver, and preferably no more than 14 days old. And that's in fairness to the driver. We don't want someone submitting a video that's a year old, and then that's not fair to anyone involved. So preferably within 14 days. That's not a hard and fast rule, but that's what we'd prefer it to be. So once someone fills out the online form, an email gets sent to the online reporting team. And it's important to note that no video is uploaded at this stage. It's a 2-stage process. In the UK, it's all done on the same initial form. The video gets uploaded at the time of the initial complaint. But there's advantages to the 2-stage process I'll cover in a minute. So the online reporting team, at the moment, it has fluctuated a bit, 3 to 4 sworn police officers, and 1 or 2 of them are full-time and a couple are part-time, along with 6 full-time unsworn members. And all these, I should point out too, that all these police and unsworn members aren't just doing OpSnap, they're doing the other online reporting as well. So they do a bit of a mix. So the online reporting team would triage a report. They'll enter the details. We've got a very comprehensive spreadsheet where we track everything right through to the end with these submissions. And they send the submitter a link via the Axon community portal to upload their digital evidence. Now, we use Axon for our body cams, as do many other police forces. It's a secure portal where all the body-worn camera gets uploaded to. We also have the ability within that to send a link out to the public to upload footage. Now, that's obviously very secure, and another advantage of it is we can set a time limit on it. We have the link set to expire after, I think it's 7 days or 10 days. And also, once the link gets used once, it can't be used again. So it can't be spread around social media or anything like that and have thousands of people upload something. So it's really good in that regard. So once they submit their video, an email gets sent to the online reporting team. Someone logs in and downloads the digital evidence and uploads a spreadsheet. Generally, that's an unsworn member. And the reason for that is we leave the sworn members to assess the submissions and take the appropriate action. It's important to note there that someone, for example, on light duties, returned to work, someone who's injured or sick, it could be a really good role for someone like that, finding them something meaningful to do rather than just trying to find something to keep them occupied. It's something they can really get involved in, a really good thing. So they'll create the paperwork, video stills and infringement notices and post them out to the registered operator. It's important to note here the video stills, we always put with the paperwork stills of the offence occurring, because if you didn't send something out to show that they actually committed the offence, these people would be going, what's this? I didn't do this. So the stills are very important in that. And we always update the submitter to advise the outcome. We don't tell them exactly what's happened. We'll just say positive action. Could mean anything, but we've taken action, or no further police action if we don't do anything, and we update the spreadsheet, and that's essentially the end of the matter. So offence types. In the UK, up to 50% of submissions are from vulnerable road users. They call it Operation Close Pass. In summer, it's much less in winter. UK environment's a bit different to Australia and ACT. Lots more rural roads and much narrower roads. In the ACT, we have a lot of cycle lanes, nice wide roads and that. So interestingly, in the ACT, we've only had 30 submissions from cyclists, 80 from pedestrians, 50 from passengers in vehicles, and 9 from motorcyclists. And I believe that's just due to the completely different road environment in the ACT. So 35% of the offences that we see through OpSnap are traffic light offences, both red and yellow lights, and 15% are due care and attention. So that's half the submissions are lights and due care. And then we get down into other, more minor offences. So these are the stats since OpSnap launched through to the end of June 25. As you can see, started off small, 42 in the first month, 63 in the second month. It's important to note there in July, in the third month, we had 27 submissions in the first 2 weeks. Then we put out our first compilation video, which Chris played for you in his segment on the middle of the month, on the 16th of July. Then in the next 3 weeks, next 2 weeks, we had 85 submissions. So a threefold increase in submissions in the 2 weeks following the release of that compilation video. So I can only attribute it to the release of that video and the publicity that generated. So you can see we've had a couple of good months in August and September of 24, and then it dropped off a bit, and it's going back up again. And we're getting around just under 200 submissions a month for the last couple of months. So it seems to be on a general upward trend. So the stats out of all the submissions we've had 1,858 submissions. From that, we've generated 1,121 traffic infringement notices, which is a fine and/or demerit points. And interestingly, that's about 10% of the ACT's total infringements issued for the same period. And I expect that to grow to maybe 15 or 20% as we level off around maybe 200 or maybe even more submissions per month. We've issued 249 formal cautions, 134 warning letters. Now, the warning letters are for more minor offences where we don't deem it appropriate to send out an infringement notice. And essentially, the letter just says, your driving has come to police attention via OpSnap. Please do better in the future. But nothing's happening to you this time, but just please be more careful in the future. Now, the other interesting stat is that about a third or 30% of our submissions, we take no action, and that's for a few reasons. The main one being that people don't upload their digital evidence. And I believe in the majority of the cases that's because even though we've got a tick box to say you have to have evidence, people still fill out the form anyway. The number plate's not readable. I made a decision early on in the piece that if the number plate wasn't recorded on the video or the number plate wasn't verbalized on the dash cam audio, then we wouldn't take any action. And that's for basically if the matter went to court, there could be no doubt about the identity of the vehicle, and it's not just one person's word against another as to whether it was them or not. Or there was no offence detected, or we find that very rare in the submissions. Well, that's the end of my presentation. Before we get on to questions, I've got my details on the screen as well as Chris's and the dangerous driving email address. I'm more than happy to, if my questions or your questions aren't answered today, I'm more than happy for you to shoot me an email, and I'm happy to send you the presentation or answer any questions via email or phone at a later time.
Thanks, Chris and Andrew. Both fantastic presentations, and I'd encourage everyone now, if you have any questions, if you can put it into the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. But I might start us off with a question for Chris. Oh no, sorry, Andrew. It really stands out to me that 10% of all your enforcement in ACT now is from dashcam footage. That number is quite significant, and you're hoping that's going to grow. I'm just wondering how that impacts traditional policing enforcement up there, and is it starting to signify a bit of a shift towards community-led enforcement models?
Yeah, look, it does appear to be that way, and I believe that it's really good for public engagement. I think the public being able to send in footage, and now that they can see we are actually taking it seriously, and we are taking action on the dash cam footage, I believe it's really beneficial to the public, and they can see that we are taking action, and it involves the public. They feel that they can do something to improve our road safety as well. They're not just a bystander. If they see something happening on the roads that is not right, well, they can report it, and we can take action about it. And it's that whole thing, I think, premise behind OpSnap is that you don't know who's going to be recording you and who's going to potentially be sending in a video of your bad driving behaviour. And that's where I believe OpSnap is really beneficial. Once the public knows about it and think, well, someone around me could be recording me and sending me in, I better pull my head in and do the right thing.
Thank you. I have a question from William. Is there any data on the influence this type of reporting is having on driver behaviour?
Yeah, that is a really good question. It's something we want to investigate further down the track. I believe there's some studies have been done, which Chris might speak to in a moment, but it's still fairly early on in the piece. But certainly it would be extremely beneficial to know whether someone who's been issued an infringement via OpSnap, whether it changes their driver behaviour in the future and leads them to receive less infringements in the future than people. Yeah. So, but Chris, do you have anything? I believe there's a study that you're aware of in that regards.
Look, I'll just defer back to the research done by Helen Wells, which some of the interviews that were conducted were not just with submitters, so the people who had witnessed and uploaded footage, but with the submittees, so the people who'd been subject of enforcement. Their attitudes from memory were somewhat defensive, that they echoed some of the attitudes that Andrew talked about in that small minority of people who feel this should be the police job to actually catch me doing this. They disputed sometimes, for example, with close passes of a cyclist, 1.5 metres, that actually get down to brass tacks about, well, how far was I from the cyclist? So I think the road safety message is lost on some people, and we see that through our regular enforcement efforts anyway. But what I'd like to point out is that the three pillars I mentioned, that certainty, severity, and celerity, these are all enforcement objectives that change behaviour. We don't have to change attitudes. It's a behaviour that we want to change. And I think there's a real opportunity for research specifically about the impact of this type of enforcement. And as Andrew's pointed out, there's some quirks to the Australian setting, and I think the ACT would be a really good place to start that study.
Thanks, Chris. I've got a question from Greg Casey and also Casey Yates, just in regards to how this is progressing through the courts. So I'll read it out. Have you had any of these matters disputed in court? What have the outcomes looked like? And how have the submitters tended to respond when they realise they must attend court?
Yeah, good question. So far, we actually haven't had any matters go all the way through to a court hearing. In the future, I think we've one later this month or next month is the first one, is the motor one. So yeah, great question. At this stage, we don't really know, but I guess it's important to know it's been running for over 12 months, and as yet we still haven't had tested on making it all the way through court. A lot of the time, we have had a number of disputes, but finding that the online reporting team, having a chat to the person, showing them the footage, potentially, for even those people who weren't convinced by the stills, they're showing the footage, and I think they're finding that most people end up paying the infringements. But certainly, going forward, it will be interesting to see, how these court matters do pan out.
Thanks, Andrew. I've got another question here from Catherine Bates, who is the Managing Director of Amy's Foundation with a particular focus on cyclists. And she wanted to know what tools are used to triage the footage beyond sworn officer judgment calls.
I'm not quite sure what the.
Yeah, that's a fair question,
Mm.
and it comes down to the legitimacy of the program. Andrew's point that police, like sworn police, should be the ones making the decision is good, and then even deeper into that is that it should be police with actual experience as cyclists, as motorcyclists, as pedestrians, because there's a real risk of something that I think Helen Wells terms windshield bias, that if footage is reviewed just by car drivers, that there's the risk of a dynamic emerging of us and them, and that's not what we would expect to see from an enforcement program, which should be completely unbiased. So the next part of the answer to that question is that centralising the effort rather than distributing it to one police officer over on this side of the state, one police officer in the city of Melbourne, actually centralising it and training these people about how to sort of inoculate themselves against these biases is a real a feature, I think, of what I saw in South Wales with OpSnap.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'd encourage, we've got these two great speakers here. If anyone else has some questions, feel free to put them through. I've got another one I mentioned. I know we've all got Crime Stoppers in our states across Australia. I'm just wondering how this complements the Crime Stoppers program.
Well, I think the ACT Crime Stoppers is different to what you have down here. In ours, we don't have the ability to upload video, only a single photograph, or I think. And the Crime Stoppers reports, generally speaking, in the ACT are only used for intelligence purposes. They're not followed up or anything like that. So I guess it complements it in the fact that what previously we wouldn't be able to action a Crime Stoppers report, even if the person said they had video of an offence, because they're only used for intelligence purposes. But now I guess we can still have those intelligence reports where there is no video. And if there is evidence of a offending behaviour, then it can be submitted via OpSnap when police will investigate and take action.
Totally agree. I think all those all those submissions that don't result in an enforcement outcome at least paint a picture of your system, of your road network, and you can start to see where it's beginning to wobble. Crime Stoppers is an interesting one too, because fundamental to the Crime Stoppers program is the opportunity for people to remain anonymous when they submit this information. So it's a real consideration, I think, for any jurisdiction going on this journey, is get in early with Crime Stoppers. I know we're in Victoria already starting the conversation, because they get a lot of information. I think in Victoria, they get somewhere in the order of 2,000 high-risk driving reports every month. And we'd like to really see how we can leverage that to serve both purposes. But the question of anonymity is one that is fraught. And as you heard from Andrew, submitters to the ACT dangerous driving program are required to select a box confirming they will attend court.
Thanks, Chris. I know you've just sort of touched on it a little then, but we've had a bit of chatter about how Crime Stoppers operate in Victoria, in particular with the road safety See It, Share It campaign that's on at the moment. Maybe if you could give us a quick rundown of how that's different to the ACT model.
Yeah, so I can't speak on behalf of Crime Stoppers, but I can speak of my knowledge of how the program operates. With our road policing command, we certainly work with Crime Stoppers on that campaign. Because it remains important. People should be sharing things they see on the road. The report itself would be triaged by an Intel practitioner to check all those basic metrics, that it's valid, it can be validated, that there's sufficient detail for action to be taken. But then it goes ultimately to a police officer for further investigation. That's one pathway. Or if it falls short of that, it would be used for intelligence.
Thanks, Chris. I think that's probably about it for the questions.
Sorry, Tim, there's a couple of people who've got their hands up. Do you want me to unmute one of them and allow them to talk? So
yeah.
we've got Juliet and Rachel and Catherine Bates as well. So I'll start with Juliet just because she's top of my list. Hopefully you're unmuted now. I can't hear you at all.
I did see a follow-up question appear on screen. It was about the the assessment of videos depicting offences around cyclists. And the follow-up question was, is that burdensome on the decision maker? And at least from my interactions with the South Wales Police, that was not evident at all. They felt value and purpose in their work, and they recognised that they had to remain somewhat impartial in the way they made their decisions. The two-factor part is also useful in that confidence that even if I think the decision is correct, I move it on to someone else who must also agree, or it goes nowhere. So I think that's an important part of that.
Thanks, Chris. There's a few more questions in there that we can wrap up with, probably to both of you here. From your experience, what's the interest from the other Australian jurisdictions so far in this sort of technology or program?
Well, I haven't had much interest from other states apart from Victoria, obviously from Chris. Yeah, it's and to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised by that, because I think it's a great tool, and especially with 41 out of 43 UK police forces adopting some form of OpSnap, there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing it here in Australia, especially now that we've been a test bed for it. We've been operating for over 12 months. I'd love to see other jurisdictions doing exactly the same thing, or a format of it.
I agree, and I think it's not that other jurisdictions aren't interested. I think opportunities like this to present to the college is demystifying exactly what it is, because I think some people at first glance see dashcam enforcement and think, yeah, we can do that. People submit to Crime Stoppers, the report goes out to the police member, they get in their car, knock on the door and follow up. But this is different. This is a centralised and quasi-automated process that, as you can see from Andrew's presentation, is now responsible for 10% of the ACT's penalty notice enforcement.
Thanks, Chris. So there's some great questions coming through, and I don't think we're going to get to them all, because I actually want to throw to Lyndall to have a little chat to you about the Road Policing Network before we leave you for today. But thanks again for the presentation, Chris and Andrew. Really, really interesting, and something we should be looking at.
Thank you.
Hello. So yes, as Tim said, I'm Associate Professor Lyndall Bates from the Griffith Criminology Institute at Griffith University, and I am the chair of the Road Policing Network for the Australasian College of Road Safety. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here today, and I'd also like to thank Andrew and Chris for a really interesting and informative seminar. It was fantastic. I think we can all agree that Andrew has showed some exceptional persistence in getting OpSnap up and running in Australia, which is to be applauded. We did have a few questions that we didn't get to, so I'd like to echo Tim's comments and say reach out to Chris and Andrew if you want to discuss the presentation in greater detail. Send them an email. I would like to thank Casey and Tim for facilitating today's webinar. But if you aren't members of the Road Policing Network already, I encourage you to join our network. We aim to strengthen collaborations between police officers, researchers, practitioners, and others who are committed to road policing and road safety in order to reduce road trauma. I look forward to seeing you either at the Road Policing Network workshop in Perth at the ACRS conference or at our next webinar. But thank you very much for joining us.